Thanks, Greg. Hello. It is Super Bowl Sunday. That's crazy. It's hard to believe it was a year ago, right? Who's excited for the game? Yeah. I'd like to do a little survey. Who's excited for the commercials? Anyone? The food? How about Taylor Swift? Oh, see, I knew. Who could care less? Anyone? Yeah, there's a lot of people there too, right? So it's always fun to do a quick survey of those kind of things. But yeah, so happy Super Bowl Sunday. One more thing that I want to make you aware of. Craig always does a great job of making us aware of things that are happening. But in case you're unaware, we have a ministry in the community that operates Monday through Saturday called Revive Consignment. And we have a store here in Woodstock and one in Smyrna. And 10 years ago, on the 17th of this month, myself, my wife, and a small team opened the second location of Revive Consignment in Smyrna. And so that means we're going to be celebrating our 10-year anniversary at the store in Smyrna. And it's going to be on the 24th, which is Saturday. It's going to be from 12 to 6. And so it's going to be a great time together to just celebrate what God's done in that community and through that store. You know, we open the stores to show that church is more than just a Sunday meeting, but the vision of the stores is to carry out the vision of Jubilee Church. It's to put us out there in the community Monday through Saturday so that we can see more people come to know God, find freedom, discover purpose, and make a difference. And you might be here and say, I found out about Jubilee through Revive. And that's our hope, right? That's what we want to see. And so it's a way we serve the community. It's the way that people can have, a Jesus-centered environment to come and shop and experience the love of Jesus. And so I just want to invite you out to that. It's at Revive Smyrna, which is on Cobb Parkway, right near the Braves Stadium in the Best Buy Shopping Center. But it's on the 24th this month. Love to see you there. But that's my one announcement. But we are continuing today in a series called Emotionally Healthy Relationships. And the title of today's message is actually borrowed from a business book. And I've mentioned it before up here, but I think if everyone adopted the principle in this book and lived by it, I think the world would be a better place. And the name of the book is called Radical Candor. Radical Candor. Some of you don't know, for me, for a while, I didn't know what candor meant. I know what I was like, candid camera. That means it's hidden, right? No, candor actually means like you're unreserved, you're honest, you have a sincere expression of what you think and feel, right? It's being open. It's kind of a forthrightness, right? And how you approach your relationships with people. And so to be radically candid is a way to approach relationships, I think, that keeps them healthy. And I will kind of break down what I mean by that. And I think the main thing that could be said that builds relationships is trust. So trust is the foundation between two individuals. But the fact is that between any two individuals, from time to time, that trust will be compromised. It will be perhaps broken when we interact with each other. And brokenness in relationships generally results when that trust that we have with one another is broken. And so in my limited experience as a pastor, I would say there's three main causes of brokenness in relationships. I'll just throw them out there to you. There's probably more. If you know more about this stuff, you're going to be like, you missed this one and that one. And that's fine. I'm going to do the best I can here. So number one is very clear. I think the Bible's super duper clear on this, is that we sin against each other. And that happens from time to time. In relationship, we sin against each other. And I think this is really the ultimate cause of brokenness in our relationships. The main pathway to healing when this happens is through humble acknowledgement of that sin by one person or the other, and to ask for forgiveness. And then for forgiveness to occur from one person to another, and then move to a place of rebuilding the trust that was broken, right? And so it's kind of basic stuff, right? When we sin against each other, we confess, receive that forgiveness, and then the rebuilding of trust starts to take place. The other two things that I'm going to mention here, and maybe it's not completely comprehensive, but I think it does cover a large portion of what we struggle with. The other two things that cause brokenness are things that can originate in non-sin issues. So these are things like things you're annoyed by in other people, misunderstandings, miscommunication. How about this one? Ignorantly insensitive people. People who don't know that they've just offended you, but they have, right? And so things like just feeling offended by one another. But when those kind of non-sin things happen, those inadvertent things that put us on different pages in our relationships, then it starts, if we don't deal with them, it causes us to slide into sin. Right? We start to move in a direction where what started out as a non-sin issue becomes a sin issue, and then we have to go and fix it. And so what we have to do is that when these things come up, we have to address them. Right? And so what happens is people fall into one or two camps, generally, that keeps us from addressing these non-sin issues. So the next 2 points are basically what most of the message is about. Either we can be too passive, which is number 2. So you avoid conflict, you undershare, you stuff your true feelings. You got any stuffers in the room? Anybody willing to admit that? Like you just stuff your emotions instead of expressing them in a healthy way. And then emotions kind of build up underneath the surface. Or we're too assertive, which is a kind way to put it, right? Too assertive. It's too much conflict. You overshare. You're kind of intolerant. You're nitpicky. You're too direct. Right? You're kind of that brash person that just rubs everybody the wrong way. I mean, you probably don't even realize it, and everybody else is like, what is wrong with that dude? So, I think we can fall into one or two of those categories. And so the principle that we need to practice in order to avoid these two pitfalls is what Kim Scott, who wrote this book that the title of this message is based on, is called radical candor. That's what, in order to avoid these two pitfalls, we need to practice radical candor. And so I'll define what she defines in this book as radical candor. It's the ability to both speak directly and care personally. Speak directly and care personally. Or how about this? To speak the truth in love with gentleness and respect. Learning how to do that. Right? So, again, we either avoid conflicts at all costs or are passive in our approach to resolving conflict. Or we have a tendency to speak the truth, but it's not in a spirit of gentleness and humility. And it often lacks self-awareness and is too assertive. And another way to put this is that some speak directly and don't care personally, while others care personally but don't speak directly. And then you have those in the camp that don't speak directly or care personally. And if you're in that place, you just need Jesus, right? You need, maybe just start with caring, okay? Because you're in a place of apathy, really. But when we are passive in our relationships, we allow our ruminating thoughts and the devil to lead us to make assumptions about others' motives or intentions. This, in turn, erodes our trust in people, hardens our hearts, and ultimately leads to the destruction of our relationships. When we just don't deal with stuff, it just leads to a hardening of the heart. But then when we're overly assertive in our relationships, regardless of our intentions or motives, we come across as prideful, insensitive, or unloving. We share with people without ever asking the question, are they ready to receive what I'm about to say? This erodes trust and then tempts others to harden their hearts against you. You become the person that everybody's annoyed with, and then they start to avoid, right? Because you're unaware of how direct you are or how you're being too assertive. And so these unhealthy practices lead us down a slippery slope of pitfall number 1. I didn't put these on a slide, but just remember this with me, of making assumptions. That's where we find ourselves in big trouble. We make assumptions about one another. In a sense, we attempt to read other people's minds and assume what they are thinking and intending. Or we think other people should be able to read our minds. They should just know, right? They should just know. Jerry Scazzaro said that's a lie from the pit of hell, which I think is a little extreme, but it does set yourself up for failure. 1 Corinthians 2:11, mind reading, it's not a good thing. The Bible says it's bad, okay? So 1 Corinthians 2:11 is one of those scriptures. It says, for who knows a person's thoughts except the spirit of that person which is in him? So also no one comprehends the thoughts of God except the Spirit of God. Jerry Scazzaro puts it this way, God is omniscient. He knows all things about all situations, and God alone knows what is going on in the minds of other people. Yet, we routinely play God when we make assumptions about another person or interpret certain behavior without verifying the facts. We're all guilty of this, right? We are all guilty of playing God in this way. And I've shared this before, but this book, there's another book called Crucial Conversations. So if you're taking a list of books, we got Radical Candor, number 1, Crucial Conversations, number 2. This whole series is based on emotionally healthy discipleships. So if you're a big reader, you can get those. But this explanation of how conversations unfold, I think, is really helpful. And so, throw up the slide. We've got, this is how an interaction generally takes place. And yet we don't, so we understand that when we interact with somebody, we either observe something that they're doing or we hear them say something to us, right? So we see and hear. And then what we think happens is that we go immediately to the feel. So we're like, oh, they did this, therefore it made me feel this way, and so I'm going to react or respond to what they did. But what really happens is we tell ourselves a story. Regardless, so somebody says something to us, we tell ourselves a story in our own mind about what's really going on here, and then it causes emotions to stir up. And then we either react in a way that's unloving or respond in a way that's not really what the person meant to begin with, right? And so we just find ourselves in a place of confusion. And you know what it's like. You observe something or something was said that causes you to kind of start to go down the path of telling yourself a negative story about that person, right? So they say something that's insensitive or whatever it is. But before you conclude the narrative in your mind, what it's important to do is to stop the story. You got to stop telling yourself the story. When you get to a place where you're filling in the gaps with your own assumptions, you got to stop and say, wait, I don't know what they quite meant when they said that, and therefore it causes you to stop. And you're able to put that thing on pause until you're able to get clarity about what's really going on. And so bear with me in this. I think it'll make sense as I continue to unpack it. Here's one example. This is one thing that I'll do to help myself in this way. So often when I'm driving, I'll do this. And we were driving the other day, and we were on a 2-lane road with the 2 yellow lines in the middle, and somebody just like sped around me anyways, you know? And so we've all had that happen, right? Somebody cuts us off or whatever it is. And I've actually disciplined myself to say out loud, wow, they must have to pee real bad. You know what I mean? Like, instead of going down the path of like, you just endangered my entire family and I'm going to chase you down and beat you up, right? Like, that's where we kind of go if we don't stop ourselves. But I've like trained myself. And when I do that, I notice my body feels different. I'm just like, well, must have to pee. You know what I mean? And it's just like, and then I just feel neutral about it. I don't feel angry. I'm not like wanting to chase the person down or whatever it is. And in a different scenario where you actually know the person and they've done something that rubs you the wrong way or leaves an unanswered question, just stop there. If you have something that's not clear about what just happened between you and another person, then just stop until you can get clarity on what actually happened. Instead of filling in the gaps with your own assumptions and then allowing your emotions to rile up, and then now you're in this place of just like, you're bent out of shape. And so it's clear that the thing that, or what can go wrong in these scenarios is a story where the gap has been filled in with negative emotions. And another way to describe the word assumption are potential lies. Believing lies about people. That's essentially what you're doing. And the Bible is crystal clear. This is one of the 10 Commandments. This is like super crystal clear. Exodus 20:16, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. When we make assumptions, and then it causes our emotions to be stirred up about an interaction that we've had with somebody, we are believing lies. We are bearing false witness against our neighbor. And so what we have to do is to do the work of going back to that person to clarify what was said and what was intended by the kind of observation or interaction. And it's then that we get closer to the truth, and then we can respond accordingly, right? So as we go back, we get clarity, then we fill in the gaps with what's actually true or what the person actually intended by what they did or what they said. And I just want to say, 99 times out of 100, the actual truth is better than the assumptive story that you'll tell yourself in your own mind. You get clarity, like somebody does something that just rubs you weird, and you get clarity on what's going on. Like maybe they're just dealing with something. Maybe they just had a bad day. Like whatever, maybe they skipped a meal. I don't know what it is, but like you figure out, right? And it leads you to a place of compassion and understanding rather than a place of division with that person. And so if I had to subtitle today's message, it would be Stop Mind Reading, which is what we attempt to do when we do that. Speak and clarify the truth in love. Again, the origin of most brokenness in relationship between two good-willed people can be found in transgressing our limitations by reading other people's minds or expecting that they can read ours. And so we got a couple of proverbs for this one. Proverbs 18:2. A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion. Ooh. Proverbs 18:15, an intelligent heart acquires knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeks knowledge. So when someone rubs you the wrong way and you either express your opinion about that person in your own mind, or even worse, express your opinion about that person to other people that are not involved with either the problem or the solution, which is called gossip, which brings even more of a mess in your life. The Bible is very clear. Like when you do this, you're a fool. And the Bible said it, not me, okay? And to quote a wise man who said once, I pity the fool. Pity the fool, you know? Don't be the fool, right? Go and gain gain understanding. We must be a people that seek to live out of the truth, not lies or narratives that we've made up in our own mind about other people. So that's kind of encompassing what can get us into a pitfall is this place of assumption and telling ourselves false stories about people in our lives. Here's the next one. These are the two things. We have assumptions, and another source of growing tension in relationships is unhealthy expectations. Yeah. You see, expectations, we can kind of hear that word and like feel a little bit of cringy or whatever it is, especially when it's outside of your job or whatever. But like there's multiple relationships like marriage, whether it's a work relationship, whatever, that have kind of built-in expectations, and that's fine. And expectations are not bad, but they are bad if they're unhealthy. And I'm going to go through 4 ways how you know if your expectations are unhealthy. Number 1, they're unconscious. So we have expectations of others that we don't even know we have until they break them. And you're like, why'd you do that? And like, I didn't know you didn't want me to do that. You know, like that's what happened. We have these expectations that we're not even aware of ourselves. So, for instance, when you come into a marriage, you've come from 2 different marriages that have been modeled for you your entire life, or maybe lack thereof, and then you come together and try to get married and bring those 2 things together. So you have expectations about what marriage looks like in your own mind before you even get there. And all of a sudden you're like fighting with your spouse and you're like, well, where did that come from? You know, and it came from your past. It came from expectations you weren't even sure were there. That's why premarital counseling is super helpful, by the way. If you're on your way to get married, do premarital counseling. Kids' grades, you know, or their performance, like you may have expectations about that you don't realize until you're like shouting at your kid and you're like, oh, I didn't know, you know. So you just want to make sure that you're aware. When they come up, apologize and deal with them. Number 2, unrealistic expectations or unreasonable expectations. You might have the expectation that your small group will end on time, even though it never has in the history of the group. And so you find yourself upset. But your expectation is unrealistic, like history tells you. This is not a subtle dig at anybody in their group. You might have the expectation that those close to me will make my birthday special this year, even though that hasn't happened in the past 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, right? And then you find yourself in a place of disappointment. You may expect that I will text you back immediately. And that's just setting yourself up for failure. It's unrealistic based on the history of my texting. Okay, no, I'm just kidding. So unrealistic. Number 3, how about this one? Unspoken. So we're conscious of them, and they might be realistic, but they're unspoken. And again, if you're ever thinking, they should just know, you're setting yourself up for failure. You're setting yourself up for failure. So all the food will be removed from the office fridge at the end of the week, right? But it's never happened before, and nobody's ever communicated it, right? You're setting yourself up to be disappointed. Or maybe this one, my kids' friends are eating all my food, right? Well, you never told them not to. So they're going to raid the fridge and the pantry when they come over. So we have unconscious, unrealistic, unspoken. How about this one? Unagreed upon. So it may be conscious, it may be realistic, and you may have even said it out loud, but the other person never agreed to it. Just because you said it doesn't mean it's now in place forevermore, right? And so just because you invite someone to dinner doesn't mean they have to come. Or just because a family member expects you to call them once a week doesn't mean you have to do it, right? Or doesn't mean that if you're on the other side of that they should do it. Or just because you think that parking across the street from your driveway in your neighborhood is rude doesn't mean that you should expect that your neighbor should know that and not do it, right? Anyways, sorry. I don't know why I got so animated on that one. But yeah, so these are unhealthy expectations, and they set us up for failure. So it's these assumptions that we make, these false stories we tell in our mind, and these unhealthy expectations. These are 2 things that contribute to brokenness in relationships. And so what I want to do is spend the rest of the time sharing some practices that can help us heal our relationships or prevent them from, getting in a place of unhealth to begin with. And it does center around this ability to both speak directly and care personally in all of our relationships, to maintain these healthy relationships. So first of all, I want to start with proactive communication practices. These are ones that can prevent you from getting the pit altogether. Number 1, appreciations. So often we don't share appreciations with one another unless somebody goes above and beyond, right? Then you're like, wow, what a great, but what I'm talking about here is actually sharing appreciation for observing people to doing the things that they're actually expected to do, right? Just everyday things. So even though I know it's a mutual, or should be a mutual responsibility with spouses to do things like unload the dishwasher, or roommates perhaps unload the dishwasher. If your roommate unloads the dishwasher, say, hey, thanks for unloading the dishwasher, even though it was their day to do it, or whatever it is. Thank you for taking care of the kids today. Thank you for cleaning the house. It looks great. How about this one? Thank you for working hard and providing an income for the family. Thank you for friendship. Thank you for staying after and helping clean up, even though you signed up to stay after and help clean up, right? We're just expressing appreciation. We're recognizing what people do in their day-to-day lives and expressing thanks for those things. Number 2, this one's helpful. New information. Relationships can only grow if we stay up to date about what is happening in each other's lives. It's why we have a time for announcements every week. We want to stay up to date about what's happening in church life so that we can grow in our relationships. And so here's an example. Just letting people know, right? Turns out I can't make it to the movies tonight. I got to study for my test or whatever it is. Hey, sweetheart, they couldn't find childcare, so I know they said they weren't bringing their kids for dinner, but they're actually bringing their kids for dinner, right? Okay, great, I'll throw chicken nuggets in the oven or whatever it is, right? Instead of just being like, honey, I thought you said that they weren't, you know what I mean? You just want to, when new information arises about different things, we just want to, this might be overly simplistic, guys, but we just want to go through it here. How about this one? hopes and wishes. So all relationships become richer when we pay attention and share what we hope to see happen in the future. So Christine shared this year, I hope to go on a cruise for my 40th birthday. And so we're making plans to make that happen. But now I'm going to have to tell her that I told all of you guys she's turning 40 this year. So hopefully that'll go well later. Man, didn't check with her on that illustration. Maybe, anyway, that's right. Pray for me, guys. She looks great though, doesn't she? She looks wonderful. I mean that with all sincerity. She is beautiful. Even like, if you have an ambition for the future, like I hope one day to make the high school soccer team, like share that with your parents. But these are proactive approaches to help us in our relationships. And these are just 3 different ways, I'm sure there's more, that we can be proactive in our communication with others. It will help prevent assumptions being made and the need for difficult conversations and apologies later. But if we find ourselves in a place where the tension is rising in our relationship, and again, this is between 2 good-willed people, right? I understand there's like malicious people out there that are trying to hurt us, and like this doesn't apply to that, but it's like 2 people that are in relationship. The tension is rising, which means a conversation is needed, or what the book calls a crucial conversation is needed to help relieve the tension. I said last week that one of the principles of emotionally healthy discipleship is that love is the measure of our maturity. This is what it means to be emotionally and spiritually mature, is that we grow and grow into greater people of love. We model who Jesus was, what he did. We walked just as he walked. And so I'm going to read this next passage, but if you would, please slow down with me. Don't dismiss it as a piece of poetry that's only read at a wedding, and try to receive it and try to feel, am I actually following the principle of love in the Bible? In 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4 through 7, love is patient. This can be really convicting if you slow down. And kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable. Pause. Or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing. Another translation says it keeps no record of wrongs, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Man, that's challenging. Like this might be one of the most concise definitions of the life that Jesus has called us to live. And I think one of the most profound things about this definition of love is that it rejoices with the truth. And yet, often we don't take time to understand someone's actions or intentions before we immediately become irritable, resentful, rude, right? And then we get to the place where we're holding grudges, and then we feel justified in our righteous anger towards that person. Guys, that's so far from the life that Jesus has called us to live. So far. And once again, the source of all this often comes when we don't know the whole truth about the situation. So we fill in the gaps with our own assumptions or unhealthy expectations. So here's some tools to help you in this situation. If you find yourself here where tension is building in a relationship, how do we approach those things? Here we go. Number 1, grace. Grace. You got to start here. Love God, love your neighbor. Or the Lord's Prayer that says, God, please forgive me of my sins and help me to forgive others that sin against me. It's that proactive forgiveness. That we're like, God, I know people are going to rub me the wrong way today, so please go ahead of me and allow me to forgive whatever I need to forgive today because I know it's going to come at me. Right? It's the approach that the grace we've received to God, we then freely give out to other people. You absolutely, and no matter what scenario, situation, well, I would say, and in some scenarios and situations, you can just choose to let it go. Let it go, right? See, I did look up like the lyrics of that song, and the rest of that song is completely unhelpful. Like she's somehow like letting it go because she's got this grudge against everybody, and then it takes her to a place. I don't know. It's just bad. But anyways, that one line is good to think about and remember. But seriously, you can choose to believe the best in a person and know from time to time they get a little bit grumpy. Right? They do. We get grumpy. And you can actually choose to not be offended by them. You can. And when they, have had their Snickers bar, you can go and check on them. Right? And they feel a little bit better, right? And you can say, hey, it seemed like you were a little bit off today. Like, what's going on, right? And it brings us, when we have grace for people, it brings us to a place where we can approach these things with compassion and love. Not where we're coming in with this offense. And regardless if you feel like a conversation is needed for clarity or not, grace always has to be the starting place for these conversations. And when it's possible to forgive someone before even the conversation starts, it makes things less emotionally charged and more conducive to a productive conversation when you give grace before you even go into it. Number 2, tools to help us. We'll just call it asking questions. I could probably do a whole sermon on just the art of asking questions. Becoming an expert question asker will cut your sinning in half, like immediately. Asking questions to God and others is the pathway to wisdom and truth. But in order to do that, you got to pause at the unanswered question. You can't fill in the gap with your own assumption. You got to pause there. You got to discipline yourself to do that. When there is a gap in our understanding through an interaction or unmet expectations, we let the gap remain until we go to that person and ask the question for clarity. Right? And that protects us from feeling all these negative feelings and having a really terrible day just because you have one bad interaction with somebody. So examples, can you clarify what you meant when you said whatever in that meeting the other day? Or maybe you notice a potentially negative facial expression or body language, and instead of assuming a poor attitude, go to that person and say, hey, I just wanted to check on you. You didn't seem like yourself today, right? Just to check in and to ask questions. How about this one? You agreed to do this task, and I noticed it hasn't been done. So I'm just curious, what obstacles have you faced in getting it done? And you do the best to ask it in a sincere way. Going to a boss, a teacher, or someone in authority and asking with a good attitude to gain understanding as to why a decision was made that you don't currently understand. Right? So asking questions. The point is, we don't avoid the conflict and come up with our own story or our own conclusions. We open our mind and heart to gain clarity about a situation while both speaking directly but caring personally in that situation. You see how this can start to bring healing in these scenarios? We use this tool of asking questions. Number 3, here's another tool: observations with possible solutions. In the reading material, it said complaints with possible solutions. I changed it to observations. I wanted to be a little more positive. But when you notice something is dysfunctional, instead of just pointing it out, come up with a possible solution with those that you're collaborating with or those that you're on team with. And Pete and Jerry Scazzaro suggest that we use the language, hey, I noticed blank, but I prefer this. And so these examples were really easy to come up with for me because I'm thinking about my wife talking to me. I noticed that, Bryce, you leave all the cabinets open after you unload the dishwasher. I'd prefer if you close them, right? I used that example last week. I noticed that, Bryce, you always leave your shoes in the middle of the floor. I prefer if you put them away. And the one I'm going to have to face is, I noticed, Bryce, that you shared with the entire room that I'm turning 40 this year. I prefer that you would ask me before you would do that. And this list, it could be much longer, and it's easy to think about different scenarios and situations where this could apply. But radical candor, again, the ability to speak directly and care personally is very helpful here. And then number 4, clarifying expectations. So we talked about unhealthy expectations. This is what characterizes a healthy expectations. Those that we're conscious of, so we're aware of the expectation. They're realistic, so it's within reason as modeled by others or in the past, and the person is willing to do it. Actually, unrealistic expectations are a leading cause of depression. Number 3, spoken, clearly communicated, or even better, written down, right? That's a good one. Hey, it was written, you signed, or whatever it is. And then number 4, agreed upon. So the other person actually said yes. So when you find yourself on a different page from someone you're relating to, pause and ask the question, where did things go wrong? Where did I not play my part? Right? Look at yourself first. If you encounter an unhealthy interaction or somebody does something that you did not expect them to do, go to yourself first and say, what is my part in this? Right? We want to do that first before we just say, well, they should have known or they should have done this. No, we got to start with ourselves. Let's go ahead and have the band come up. All right. You guys taking notes today? It's a lot of information, right? I know it's a lot. The kind of the nature of this series is that it is a lot of information. But I hope as we think about this in the life of the church, and we think about this in our relationships, that it will lead us to a place where we can find ourselves becoming emotionally and spiritually mature in our relationships. And I know that's the place that God wants us to go. And guys, this takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of intentionality. And I think, the people you've got to do it with most are usually your spouse and your kids, right? And so it's an indication of how much work it takes in order for it to be healthy. And I do also recognize that relationships can get to a place where these simple principles aren't necessarily helpful to fix them. Or maybe you need professional help to reconcile a relationship. I do recognize that happens. I also recognize that sometimes relationships can get broken to a point where boundaries need to be put in place. And maybe stipulations need to be set in place in order before that relationship can move towards a place of reconciliation. So I'm not saying oh yeah, broken relationships, it's just easy. Apply these things and they're all fixed. I know that's not the case. Because with this, and we've already talked about this, kind of the theme of our service today is that we need God's help. We tremendously need God's help to turn into people of love. Because he's the one, right, who sent his son Jesus to die in our place for our sins, to be risen from the dead, that we might be reconciled to him. He was the one who fixed the relationship that mattered the most so that all of these relationships have hope of being fixed as well. And so that's what he did for us, guys. And he wants us to bring us to a place where we come to know him through being reconciled back to him so that we can find freedom from all these things that break our relationships. And that's what he wants to do in our lives. Let's go ahead and stand. And so I just want to say, God demonstrated amazing love to us that even while we were far off from him, he pursued us in love in the person of Jesus to bring us back in relationship with him. And I just want to say, if you've never said yes to following Jesus, or maybe you felt far from God for a little bit of time, and you want to either commit your life or recommit your life to Jesus today, you can do that. The Bible says today is the day of salvation. And if you want to do that, we want to know about it. So please mark it on your communication card in the seat back in front of you, or a digital card in the app or on our website. And we want to hear about what God's doing in your life and what next steps you feel like he's leading you to take as a result of today's message. And so we're going to move into a time of singing a song of praise. But we have a prayer team. Could the prayer folks please come up to my right? They'll be ready. They'll be here during the song. And I just felt led to say, if you're in a place where you do have a broken relationship, and you know it's gotten there because of some of these things that have taken place in your life, and you want to believe God to bring healing to that relationship, we want to pray with you. We want to pray that God would go before you in that. And so these guys are going to be available during this next song and even after we're dismissed to pray for you. So we're going to sing a song of praise to him. And if you want to respond and come up and receive prayer, please come up to my right, your left. You can receive prayer for that or anything else related to today's service. But let's sing a song of praise and response to him this morning.